Okay. Thank you very much for joining us here in Korea at beLAUNCH. And I believe that accelerators obviously have a very important role to play in the development of the startup ecosystem. And it's going to be fascinating to hear your insights on this. So we'll start off with brief introductions from our panelists. I wonder if in 30 seconds you could just give us a very brief background of where you've come from so far. We could maybe start with David Lee from Kstartup.
Yes, hi, I'm David. Happy to be here. So I'm the co-founder of Kstartup, which is an accelerator based in Korea. And we have funding from Google as one of our primary sponsors, also from SK Planet and some other folks here. And we focus on Korean entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs that are based in Korea that want to bring their startup local or global and help them with different resources, both from our sponsors and also from our partner network of advisors, et cetera. So much like the other guys, we've actually worked together on a lot of things, but it's sort of the same space, but we do focus on entrepreneurs that want to go global as well.
Thank you, David. And over to you, Christine from 500 Startups.
Hi, I'm Christine. I'm a partner at 500 Startups. So 500 is actually a seed fund that also runs an accelerator program. We have a little bit over 50 million under management. And I guess just a few kind of metrics, since we always like to hear metrics from startups when they pitch. We have over 450 companies in our portfolio. About maybe 20-25% of them are international. Which means like they're actually based outside of the US. So for us, international is actually a very big focus. We have about 22 folks on staff. Half of them are in the investment team. And in terms of our accelerator program, we've completed about 5 batches to date. So they comprise about 1/3 of our portfolio. We just kicked off our 6th batch a couple weeks ago, and probably more than half of the batch at this point is international as well.
Okay, thank you, Christine. And over to Bernard Moon from SparkLabs.
I'm Bernard. I'm co-founder of SparkLabs, and we focus on companies, we focus on Korean companies that are seeking to go global, primarily in the US, Japan, and China. So that's where a lot of our mentors are based. This upcoming class, we have seen a different trend where a lot more startups from outside of Korea have applied, and we'll probably accept 1 or 2 of them, and also maybe 1 or 2 US companies that are looking for a gateway into Asia. So that's basically been our positioning so far.
Great, thanks, Bernard. And over to Ben Levy from BootstrapLabs.
Hi, thanks for having me over here. My name is Ben. I'm a partner at BootstrapLabs, and we're in the construction business. Actually, I look at what we're doing, and quite frankly, we're trying to build those bridges that everybody talks about, those bridges that help companies go from wherever they're born to Silicon Valley. So even though we deal with information technology, I can tell you it's heavy lifting, so it really feels like construction. But more seriously, BootstrapLabs, we spent the last 3.5 years figuring out what it takes for an early stage technology companies that is started outside of the US and our experiences with Europe to successfully relocate into Silicon Valley to build global, not unrooting the company from where they're from, really maintaining their heart where they're born, but transferring their head into Silicon Valley because we think this is where they can really accelerate a lot faster. And so we've done that without a fund. We see a lot of company and work with a few. We're looking at scaling this, so we're actually working on closing a venture fund so we can put our own money behind those companies. And more recently, we actually announced a Bootstrap Accelerator based out of Kuala Lumpur that's going to be looking to work with startups from ideation stage, incubation, and acceleration for a 12-month period program and try to identify the best one to bring them to the Valley, therefore replicating what we have learned with the European model.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to move on now to another topic. I was wondering if you could explain if all startups need an accelerator and briefly outline the stage in development where that's necessary. We can maybe start with Christine.
So obviously not all startups need an accelerator, and there are plenty of companies that exist and they never go through an accelerator. And there's also an argument nowadays that there's so many accelerators coming up. People think there's an accelerator bubble, that these accelerators produce poorer quality companies, which I don't believe. But I guess, so how do you know if a startup does need an accelerator? I think it really just depends on the founders. Now is a really great time to be starting a company because there's a lot more resources. The cost to building a company is much cheaper than it was 10 years ago. Access to information is a lot easier to get to. And so the environment is good. And in terms of accelerators, a lot of people, at least from our program, the reason why they want to go into our program is really to get access to our network. Like we have a very strong network of all of our companies and over 200 mentors, and it's a very global network too. So that's what they find really valuable in terms of joining the accelerator and kind of being with us for 4 months and having that kind of stamp that they're a 500 accelerator grad. It doesn't mean a company that comes in is going to magically transform and by the end of it they get all their funding, they have all their customers. It's still their company. We don't tell them what to do, but we try to give them as much access to resources and people so that we can turn hopefully an already very strong company into just to kind of accelerate them into where they want to be.
Great. Okay, thank you. Bernard, I wonder if you could outline the stage in a company's development that you feel an accelerator is most beneficial.
I don't think there's any specific stage. It just really depends on what the company needs, whether it's they need more work on their product development or they need more help on a new product launch into outside of Korea, whether it's U.S. or Japan. It just really depends on the stage and need. I mean, for us, like our 6 companies in our first class, they all varied in terms of need and why they applied. We had WePlanet that was a completely bootstrap company, to MimiBox that was self-funded but already, was operating in the black, to Avlar that already raised their Series A, had $3 million, but they came to us looking to help launch their product into the U.S. market. So it just really depends.
Thank you very much. Ben, do you have something to add there?
Yeah, I think I would agree with everything said. You look at an entrepreneur, and throughout his life as an entrepreneur, he's going to want to have a support system. He's going to need a network. He's going to need advice. So the entrepreneurs that are best, surrounded by that ecosystem, it's likely going to make them more successful. So if you're a serial entrepreneur, you probably already have that network. You can probably perform without an accelerator per se. So you can look at it as an MBA class, right? It's a crash course. There's there's learning, execution, and network, and ongoing mentoring. So these are the different values you get from these accelerators. And you might have some pieces of that, and you might not need it all. But I think if you're a serial entrepreneur, again, you might not need to go for an accelerator, except if you want to go to America and you don't have a support system in America and you want to build and break over there, you might want to consider going for an accelerators. So people coming to us, actually, sometimes they are either out of an accelerator, serial entrepreneurs, because they all have in common this desire to make that journey to Silicon Valley. And very often they need an infrastructure, a network locally to help them achieve and execute faster.
Sure, thank you. David, anything to add to that? Or?
Just a short comment. I think if you're thinking about an accelerator, do your homework. I think they all offer different things, and ultimately it's really up to you and your team to execute your product. And why you're doing the startup in the first place is because you want to be in one. And I think they do offer different things that are very beneficial, but again, they all offer different things. And some, in some cases I've seen people go to different accelerators at different stages. So do your homework, and definitely, I think in each one you'll find something special.
And just on the topic, I would warn people to go from serial accelerator entrepreneurs, because we see some of that trend happening these days. It's like you go to one accelerator in some place in hope to get to 500 startups later, or YC and others. It has an impact, back to what some people said earlier. You got to be careful of your equity, right? The most valuable asset you have in your company, and don't dilute yourself too much or too early or too soon. Sometimes the bad deals can kill your companies, even though you have a great product.
Sure, and I think Bernard has one last comment on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think just taking a step back, I think overall, specifically for Korea, accelerators are good. I mean, our viewpoint at SparkLabs is more the merrier, because you don't have the same culture as in Silicon Valley where it's truly a pay-it-forward culture. where people are very open about sharing and connecting people with others. So I think you sort of need that structure within at least the Korean startup environment where accelerators provide that mentoring. And I think the more mentoring, the better for the ecosystem.
Great. That leads us on to the next topic, really. And just considering the correct accelerator model for Asia and for Korea, what do you think is the right model for this market? We'll maybe start with David.
So generally speaking, to Bernard's point earlier, and the thing that we talk about a lot at Kstartup is community. And in the Valley, it's a little bit easier as an entrepreneur because everyone's supporting each other while in an incubator or in your startup company. You have the support system. I think in Korea, it's still kind of fragmented. And there's not a lot of people to talk to about your startup, to talk to other entrepreneurs. So model-wise, I mean, for us, we really focus more on, getting the right mentors and advisors in the network, working with other accelerators as well, because there's not so many around. But ultimately, getting those components that each startup needs, whether it's capital, whether it's the right people to hire in a team, experts in corporations that could help also with your product. So it's a mix of those things, but ultimately, it's a business. It's your business that you're running, and you need certain key ingredients for the business. But we think in Korea, it's still pretty early. So working together with each other, but also being open-minded to what's going on in the Valley and other parts of the world is really helpful to make a better formula.
Okay. I wonder for Ben, with your new venture in Malaysia, if you've got something that you're working towards in terms of a model.
Yeah, so for us, venturing in Asia is obviously new, but we believe that there are smart people everywhere in the world, and innovation can be born everywhere. So we heard that theme this morning with the chairman of Silicon Valley Bank. What's not equal is the ecosystem. And so the most mature one on earth is Silicon Valley as far as building startups. So you could be born somewhere, doesn't have to define where you're going to grow your activities or business and live every day. And so, I encourage you to, again, study the different models, what you're looking for. But so if you look at Asia, the reason we built our accelerator over a 12-month period is because we felt the need to address different aspects of the entrepreneurship journey, which was from deciding to quit your job, if that's where you are right now, you're thinking to do a startup, but you don't know how to start. You got to start zeroing in on your idea and making sure it's a one worth pursuing. Then it's about executing on that idea and validating it, building minimum viable products. And then once you have a product, it's about pushing it into the market, going through more commercials, strategies, growth hacking. And so we want to be able to bring entrepreneurs, depending on the level of maturity and knowledge and evolution, into different phases of the program. And it was very important to us because we felt like if you just address one aspect, then it's very difficult. And as accelerators, we are all hopefully equity owners. And we want to maximize the value creation generated. And the more time, we feel the more time we can spend with them, help make sure we guide them on the right tracks, will help all chances to get better returns.
And Christine, obviously you're based in Silicon Valley. I wonder what model you're using for bringing value to Asian startups.
So I agree with what David said earlier. Probably the biggest thing that Silicon Valley is maybe a little bit more developed than other parts of the world is really just the mentorship, the role models, and the community. Especially, as entrepreneurs, the default for most companies is failure. Like, it's most likely that you're going to fail, and your job is to kind of defy those expectations. For us as a fund, our expectation is that probably 80% of our companies are going to fail in some way or another and basically not result in a good return for our LPs. So that makes starting a company, even as glamorous as it seems, something that's just really difficult. And I think, depending on where in the world you're coming from, that type of failure may or may not be accepted culturally. In Silicon Valley, it's probably a little bit more open, but I find most people don't really talk about it until after the fact, many months later. Then they talk about how they failed. When they're actually going through it, you'll talk to any company and they'll just say, yeah, things are going great, and big smile on their face. But actually, things are probably going terribly, or you always feel like a roller coaster. So, I mean, in terms of like our model, in terms of like Asian companies coming over to Silicon Valley, I think it's really helped, at least the companies that have come over, it's really helped them in terms of I guess, developing more of their hustle. I mean, they already hustled a lot to get into the program, but getting the mentorship from the right people, eventually meeting investors that will invest in the company. I think that's what's been most beneficial for the companies that have come here from Asia.
I mean, briefly just to add, but I think, the cultural differences are very important. I think Americans are so good at pitching and telling the story and delivering it. It doesn't matter if their product is half as good as yours. You probably have better products, better technology, but they sell it better. And you know what? If you can't communicate your ideas, you're going to fail. And so it's very important. And so we talked about language. If you're trying to build global companies, I mean, you guys have to become fluent in whichever language you need to have to penetrate those markets. And you need to really work on your presentation as much as you work on your products.
Thank you, Ben. And Bernard, over to you. If you could maybe discuss the SparkLabs model and how you're bringing Silicon Valley mentors into the Korean ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, going a little into the details, so for each of our companies, we assign 6 mentors, based on the market that they're targeting or the specific needs. I mean, it's a conversation that we have with the mentors in the companies, and we match them directly with each of the companies, and then they guide them through, the program for the following 3 months. That's been our model, and then also, obviously, the general partners of SparkLabs, we're very hands-on, we're very involved, even though we all have full-time jobs. So that's been our focus.
Okay, thank you. Now, we've heard a lot of people discussing the Silicon Valley model itself, and which aspects of that can actually be transported to other markets. I was wondering if we could just look at that briefly. It has been touched slightly, but what aspects specifically of Silicon Valley can be transported into Korea effectively? We could maybe start with, okay, Bernard.
Well, I would put a twist on that. I mean, for us, it's definitely obviously the culture, trying to build and create that culture of mentorship and guidance. But for SparkLabs, we actually look more at the Israeli model, because there's been maybe not huge successes, but there have been pretty good successes out of Israel that plant their companies into Silicon Valley. And it's very similar to Korea in a sense that they have good engineers there. But then the founding CEOs of those companies are willing to look for, the next CEO for the next stage to take it to the next level. So that's what, for some of our companies, we are recommending, is that if they're targeting the U.S. and, maybe they aren't the best fit for the next stage, that they could bring in the CEO that would locally. So we sort of look at Israel as more of a model for some of our companies.
Just to add a little bit to that, to build the ecosystem in any country, I think you need certain components, and definitely the Valley has a lot of those because it's been thriving for a while, doing funding, innovation, early stage. In Korea, though, I think there's been that funding, but I think it's a different model than we see in the Valley, where the panelists earlier point about taking a risk and failing is seen as negative. But in the Valley, when you meet someone and they failed, you think, oh, they're experienced. So I think also from the funding side, financing side, big differences in Korea than in the Valley, and you need all those components, whether it's finding the right startups, the right team, funding, launching your product. Taking risks from a VC or angel perspective is something I'm seeing now getting better acclimated into Korea, and a big model I see in the Valley definitely is VCs take lots of risks, so do early stage investors, but they also provide value, and they give you a term sheet that it's easy to swallow. I think in Korea I've seen some that have been very scarier to look at, but I think because of these gating factors that are going away, these hindrances are going away in Korea, it's now becoming easier to get your company funded, and you feel safer as an entrepreneur. But a lot of that is following the model that's happening in the Valley right now.
Yeah, and just to add to what you said, David, I think it's important, and I've heard from people here that until very recently, venture firm would invest in startups in Korea and ask the founders to sign a personal liability responsibility for taking the investment, which means that if you fail, even though you've done nothing wrong, try really hard, but you fail, you actually have to be personally liable, and people can come after you and sue you. I mean, if you had anything like that in America, half the people would not start businesses. So I think that's very important. And yeah, fail fast is good news, right? You're not spending more of your time and energy and people's money in trying to achieve something that's not going to be there. So that mentality, pay it forward, execute fast, it's okay to fail, is going to be some of the key things that I think will be very influential for other regions and ecosystems.
Yeah, I just want to also cite an example of my prior, as we look at the Israeli model.
Yeah, no, of course.
We have a practical example out of our sort of team is that my co-founder, Jimmy Kim, who was the first CFO of Nexon, so he was a founding investor of a company called Studio X. So they had the design and engineers in Korea. They had the management team in the US. And so that worked out very well. And then Jimmy was a deal architect that sold the company to Disney. So we know that that model works.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Prezi, which we worked with since they were five guys in Budapest, and we helped them relocate to Silicon Valley. And I was pretty happy to see Prime Minister of Culture using Prezi this morning, as well as a few others. So that was really cool to see, but they are really turning into this global company, again, starting very small from Budapest, maintaining the R&D office over there because it's so hard to recruit talent in Silicon Valley. I mean, people joke around and say, look, it's easier to raise money from VCs than actually hiring talented engineers. So that or either finding an apartment that's affordable. But you look at that and say, you can today build amazing global companies and maintaining teams of research and development and management teams and even design teams in different places of the world. I think that's you're global from day one. I think Phil Libin said that very well.
Now, Christine, what would you do if an overseas startup came and pitched at 500 startups in a foreign language? I wonder if you could give us a perspective on the value of knowing English, or for the success of a startup within Accelerator.
Well, obviously, if you're going to be in the program in the U.S., knowing English is pretty critical. We did have a case where one of our companies came from Japan, and they were in our third or fourth accelerator batch. Their English was pretty weak, so they actually hired a translator to sit with them during the program and translate all of the talks and all of the meetings for them. That's obviously not terribly scalable, so they actually brought in another team member from Japan who spoke the best English, and he did the pitch at Demo Day. So I don't think your English has to be impeccable. You just have to be able to get by, but I think it's pretty critical, especially if you are trying to be a global company, and if to you global means winning in the US, then it doesn't really make sense if you can't speak English. And also, you probably just won't get as much out of the program if you're coming all the way over and you don't have the language skills. So, and I imagine, for most Koreans, I think they probably they're able to understand English. It's maybe they're sort of how I am about my Korean skills. They're feel a little bit awkward about their abilities, but they're probably fine.
So their confidence certainly plays a lot into that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Silicon Valley is a melting pot, right? I mean, if you look at what has happened over the last 4 years, 5 years, you hear a lot more accents on stages, and startup competition, I think, is becoming a lot more international than it used to be, and it's great. I mean, I've got a strong French accent. It's 15 years in the Valley, it's still there. It's not going to go away, but you don't have to feel ashamed about it. Actually, it's just part of who you are. And I think, as Kristen said, in Silicon Valley, people don't look down on you because you have an accent or your English skills is not perfect. Again, you don't have to be perfect. We see through that. People in Silicon Valley just look at the quality of what you're building.
Okay. Obviously, one of the roles of accelerators is to prepare startups for the investment stage. What are you doing specifically to prepare, this mainly for Bernard and David, Korean startups for potential investment from Silicon Valley? Go ahead, David.
Yeah. That's a good question because, no one likes to talk about investment early on, especially when they're coming to you for mentoring and, getting in mindset, how can we make this successful together? But that's an ultimate question for every startup is they need capital. And the only way to do that is you have to talk to an investor. And to talk to an investor, you have to prepare yourself, having your pitch ready, depending on which market you're pitching to. And also, the product, all these basic things that most investors will look at because they have short time span, short attention span, and they want to make the right decision financially. So for us, what we do is basically think of two markets: raising money in Korea and raising from early stage and also later stage investors and also raising money from Silicon Valley. Korea, it's a little bit easier because they know the language, it's native for them. They know the market, and usually their strength is Korean market first with the entrepreneurs. But when raising money from the U.S., it's a whole different ball game because not only language, but also the investors in the U.S. A lot of them want a company that was incorporated in the U.S. No matter what, even if it's the next Google or something, they want to make sure that they can that financially it makes sense for them to be able to watch over the company, and then when they exit the company later, that all of these things line up in that manner. So there's definitely a sense of idealism about going global from a financial perspective, but also there's a reality, which is you got to know what the rules are when raising money overseas. And even when you make a term sheet in Korea, when you sign on the line with investors, you have to know what's in that term sheet that will allow yourself to expand later, maybe to get money from an investor in the U.S., a VC. What are the roadblocks? How much percentage am I owning? Is it too much? Sometimes I'll see, the CEO has 90% of the company, and that's kind of rare. Most companies in the Valley, you're going to see 40%, 50%, just to leave room for investors to come in later. So I think those are some of the basic things, and there's more, but that we try to, when talking about investing specifically to companies in Korea.
And Bernard, yes.
Well, our role has been pretty hands-on with our companies. We sort of, once they're accepted into our program, we ask them what their sort of funding needs and path is. And we have actually directly fundraised for 3 of our companies that needed it. So we directly introduce them to either angels that we know in Korea, maybe they're part of the ex-Nexon network, or private equity guys that we know of throughout Asia. 2 of our general partners, they run an M&A boutique in Singapore, so we might introduce them to investors in Singapore or China or Indonesia. And even for, I can't announce it, one of our companies for the second class, we actually already helped them fundraise a seed round of $500K that's been oversubscribed. So we're pretty hands-on with all of our companies.
If just one thing, the one word of advice to any company trying to relocate to Silicon Valley, I think, as you said, David, is you can't land in Silicon Valley and desperately need money. You need to start building a relationship, and it takes time. So I would argue that most of the most exciting companies coming out of accelerators are already being funded before demo days, right? And so you need to build those relationships with those investors. You're not going to get funded the day you pitch them. It's about meeting with them, pitching them, building a relationship, establishing a rapport of trust, and delivering progress on a regular basis to show them that you are executing, you're moving forward, and they should be catching you because you're really hot. It's about creating that momentum. That's important as well.
Yeah, just to add to that, more times than none, you'll hear people saying, "I love the team." They might not like the product, but they love the team. You'll never hear, "I just love the product, but I don't like the team." Because people come first, and so I think getting to know the network, getting to know the eco, getting people to know you, very important, even if your English is not really great. And to Bernard's point, we're one of few guys in the Valley who are based in Korea who do a lot of traveling back and forth in addition to Christine. So, we just want to create a success story. That's really our goal, no matter who does it. And we try to help each other out because I might know somebody who needs funding from these guys or his network. So in that sense, it's different in the Valley. When we're there, we're constantly talking and supporting each other's startups. And that's the fun part of it. But that's how it is in the Valley. The culture is built on paying it forward.
Yeah, and just to add, about just the paying it forward, a lot of people will ask us, "Oh, you guys are competitive to Y Combinator or Techstars or AngelPad and all the other accelerators." And technically, I guess that's true. But for us, we don't really think of it that way. And I think just in the Valley, all the investors know each other, and they often want to pull each other into deals or recommend deals. If they think of an investor that might be a good fit for a startup, they'll send them their way. So there's a lot of back and forth, and it's very hard to have any kind of enemies in the Valley. That's just sort of the culture of it. So, we invest in a lot of companies that come out of Y Combinator. I'm sure we've co-invested on a few deals as well. So that's one thing I think that's pretty pertinent in Silicon Valley culture.
Okay. Now, I wonder if there's any specific advice that you would give to startups that haven't entered an accelerator program and what they should do to perhaps prepare to pitch to you and your program. I wonder if we could start with Bernard.
Read the application very carefully. See what we're looking for, such as minimum of 2 co-founders, preparing a video, etc. I mean, you know, basically you could probably either read our website, news articles, and things that our team has said in terms of what we're looking for. And also the best thing is actually, right now, is actually talking to our first class and asking them, you know, what they thought about the program, what do we look for, what do we emphasize.
Okay. David?
Just very quickly, I think keep an open mind about it because each accelerator has different qualities, but you know, you're already set on your company. You want to succeed, you know what you're going to do, but you go in there and someone will tell you something different, like this UI is terrible, or you know, you guys got to fire, you know, this engineer, you know, but you know, take it with a grain of salt, keep an open mind, because you might even change your ideas while you're there, and I think that's where all the learning happens, when you're meeting other entrepreneurs and hearing feedback from people who've been at war before, had been in the trenches. But at the same time, hold your own convictions about your company because you're a founder and you come this far, you know, on your own will. So I think that's something that's very special and important.
And Christine, is there anything that Asian startups are either doing very well or very poorly that you would encourage them to do to move forward?
I think, you know, the Asian companies that have come through, either we've invested in directly, you know, not through the accelerator program, or they've actually come through our accelerator program. Interestingly, a lot of them have been actually pretty far ahead in terms of traction. So we had a couple companies come in through the last couple batches from, I think one was from Taiwan, and one was actually maybe both were from Taiwan. But they came into the program and they were a mobile app company. They had, you know, millions of downloads already. So a lot of people would ask them, well, why are you going through the accelerator? So, I mean, at least what I've seen from a lot of the companies we've funded, mobile is definitely a strength just in terms of vertical, and because, you know, mobile landscape here is probably a lot more advanced than other parts of the world. But in terms of other maybe soft skills, I guess, I think a lot of it is maybe a cultural barrier. Maybe going back to what a lot of the folks said about kind of taking that, not being afraid to fail and taking the risks. And on another panel earlier today, we were talking about how important it is for entrepreneurs to be shameless and have a very thick skin and just, you know, hustle their way into getting what they want, and that's pretty important. And obviously the Asian companies that do come over, they probably already have that, but I think that is something that's, it's pretty, you know, if you do want to succeed in the Valley, then you absolutely need that.
Sure. Bruno, I think you had something to add to that.
Yeah, I just want to talk about a specific example. So one thing that we do actually like is for the CEO and the founding team to be teachable. And it sort of relates to something what David said in terms of like really focus on the team. And a specific example for us was MimiBox. Because when they applied last fall, we actually told we told their team, we told the CEO, Dino, we're like, hey, you know, we don't like subscription e-commerce. We think it's sort of like a downward trend. And he's like, hey, I'm willing to pivot. And then right away also Jimmy's like, hey, you guys don't have a mobile strategy. You guys should focus on mobile. He's like, we'll do it. And they started like that day. So that's one reason why we accepted MimiBox into our program. Because he was very teachable, very open, and they also just get things done. So,
yeah, I mean, I can't really speak about, you know, Asian companies because we haven't worked with them much. I mean, I see them, of course, in Silicon Valley as well. But I think it's back to what was said: is look, if you don't fail, you haven't tried enough, hard enough, and don't be afraid of failure. You got to own it. You know, it's a life as a startup entrepreneur is really, really difficult, and you got to push yourself through and challenge yourself every day. There's amazing rewards at the end of the road, hopefully, but as Kristen said, you know, 80% will fail, but it's all right because you're going to be, you know, you look at life as a ascending spiral, right? You're going to go back to places where you feel you're going back in time, but you're just learning each and every time and really becoming a better entrepreneur for it. And when, to your questions, when you look at accelerators, again, read what they're looking for, talk to prior classes, make sure that you know they're going to bring what is it you're looking for, and also based on the stage you're at, what are the skills they're bringing to the table that will help you achieve your next critical milestone.
Right, I wonder if we could bring it back, we've got a few minutes left, to the accelerator of the future. What do you see as the future of accelerators in Asia and specifically in Korea? And where do you feel that you'll be adding value in that development?
I'm happy to start, and I'm going to be controversial. I think the accelerator of the future does not exist physically. It's highly distributed, and I see accelerators as a function. We're serving a function right now, which is helping entrepreneurs execute better, adopt new management, teaching, such as lean startup and other methodologies and growth hacking that are really, implementing new rules in how you build a company in this new economy where you can just have infinite scalability in the cloud, be global overnight with mobile distribution, and that is really, what you've learned in business school no longer applies. And so a lot of the role we're fulfilling is, adapting and learning from the latest trends and hacks about how you do things in this new world and setting, precedents. And hopefully a lot of the things that we're teaching those entrepreneurs through those programs will become more pervasive, and they will be taught in schools so that, to our children that are growing up. So there will be a lot less to call an accelerator and condense it in a short amount of time. It will be more pervasive through times.
So the role being filled now will be filled at university, potentially?
I don't know if it's a school or some other form, if it's online education. Quite frankly, you look at the amount of people that are being touched by online education and the costs associated with it. This is massively scalable. And talk about disruption in education. A lot of accelerators are just focusing even on just that space.
David?
Yeah, I was afraid you'd call on me next. I think it's an interesting question because we're sort of at this early stage of accelerators, in a sense, where when I was growing up, there was no such thing as this. If you wanted to have a business, you learned from your parents, or you go to business school or whatever. But this is where there's Windows 3.1 launched the first SDK movement, and then mobile, and the huge app world. So people are creating businesses on the fly, and you need coaching, you need mentors to actually make it happen quickly. So I could see this model moving to other areas, not just software. Like you look in Taiwan, there's 3D printing, there's manufacturing as a service, hardware as a service, and even entertainment, fashion. So I think from a platform perspective, the accelerator model can move in any direction. But I think the format might change to this point about in the way that it's presented. It might not be in a room full of people for 3 months. It might be part of school curriculum. So maybe when you go to school, you learn about starting a business because people all know how to code, but by the time it's, the year 2000 something. And, it's just, it's staple. So who knows? But definitely, learning how to do a startup, it's learning how to do business. And that requires, learning experience from people who've done it before. And you shorten the time down, but essentially you have to learn all those basics somewhere. Sure.
Now, Christine, you're obviously coming towards 500 startups. What happens next? How do you see yourself or the accelerator developing after that?
Well, for our program specifically, I think the class size hasn't changed that much, but it's something we've talked about. We usually take about 30 companies per batch, but we've talked about, well, what if we make that even bigger, and it becomes much more of a community-driven type of program where you don't necessarily have to be in our office space, but you get access to the program from wherever you are. So it's a bit more of a distributed model. And I guess, we're always trying to figure out how we can always scale what we're doing. We've been around for about 3 years. So in some ways, we look back and think, wow, there's a lot has happened in those 3 years. But at the same time, we always kind of think, what could we be doing better? How can we really scale? I think, big grand vision for 500 is that we have, presence in almost every major market, either an office or co-working space or an accelerator in those markets as well. Right now, it's primarily in Mountain View, and then Mexico City, we also have an accelerator program. But I'll probably bring up one kind of crazy idea that I don't know how I feel about it. I'm kind of mixed feelings on it. But, maybe in the future, and going back to your original question about, the accelerator of the future, potentially maybe the accelerator of the future is more of a, someone going through an accelerator program is equivalent or just as good as getting a degree from a university. There are a lot of initiatives like Peter Thiel has this 20 under 20 program where they actually give $100K to students under 20 and convince them to drop out of college to start a company. So, and a lot of people already say things like, going through an accelerator is so much more valuable than my 2 years spent at business school. Maybe it'll start to shift more downwards towards it's much more useful than 4 years spent in undergrad. I don't know.
You're going to scare a lot of Korean mothers.
I know. This is even worse audience to say that to. But.
I don't think Ben would agree with that either. And Bernard, I think we just got time for him for a last comment from you.
Christine sort of said like what I was going to say along the lines of, maybe that it would, for some, be like trade schools replace, college education. And it might be longer programs, et cetera. And I think you'll see more of it, more accelerators popping up throughout Asia. Because I think there's still underserved major markets, like China, I think Japan, and all throughout Southeast Asia. So
there's plenty of room for more.
I mean, all of us here are startups. Look at it, like 3 years old, 500 startups, and there's amazing what they've achieved. And I think we're still all looking at ways we can scale and touch more entrepreneurs throughout the world with, what we're learning every day.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for your time, for coming to spend time here at beLAUNCH. Thank you, Ben, Bernard, Christine, and David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.